Using braid on your spod and marker rod is really beneficial, especially for when you're leading about, trying to find that perfect spot and then swapping straight over onto your spod to get the bait out there. However, with braid does come a few issues in the sense that you get more wind knots. You do tend to get more dramas when you're using braid. Crack-offs, wind knots, that type of thing, frap-ups, and it can be an absolute nightmare if you don't spool it up correctly, because it does take a little bit more care than perhaps mono does. So in this video I'm going to tell you exactly how I spool up my reels using the Spom braid and the Spom leader. So to spool up with braid, I always find it easier if you've got two spools, so your main spool and a spare spool of exactly the same depth so that they hold exactly the same amount of line. The reason for this is with the spool of braid that you get 300 meters. It's a finite length and that's how much you get, and with most spools they take a lot more than this, so either you're going to end up underspooling your reel and you'll find it hard to reach good distances, or if you back your line up first, you'll end up overfilling it, and if you overfill it, that's where the dramas are caused, the wind knots, the frap ups, that's where they happen when the spool is overfilled. So I like to do it in reverse first so that I get it absolutely perfectly. So to start with, I take my braid and I thread it through the butt eye on my spod rod. I attach it to the spool using a grinner knot and I chuck the spool into a bucket of water. The bucket of water is purely there to stop the spool from jumping about. With braid, you don't need to soak it at all. It's absolutely fine if you do it straight away. So to ensure the braid goes on nice and evenly, you need to put tension on the line through your fingers. However, with this Spom braid being so thin, it's very likely that it'll cut through your hands or create a lot of friction and actually burn your fingers when you're doing that. So I more often than not use a sock to stop my hands from getting burnt, but if you've got a glove, a towel, your jumper, your t-shirt, anything like that, is absolutely fine. Just something to stop your fingers from getting burnt. So then you wind all of the braid onto your spool, making sure you keep an even tension at all times. So once all of the braid is onto the spool, I then take just some old monofilament, it doesn't matter what it is, just any old monofilament, and I back-to-back grinner the braid to the mono, and then I continue spooling up with that mono, and that will effectively create your backing on your main reel. I'll continue to put the mono onto the spool until there is roughly 1 to 2 mil lip left on the spool. So you don't want to go right up to the top of the lip of the spool. You want to make sure that there is a small lip left, and that will create just that extra little bit of friction whilst you're spodding, so that you don't get the wind knots and the frap ups. So when I've done that on the first spool, I know that when I've reversed this onto the next spool, it's going to be absolutely perfect. So the final part of this process is to simply take your spare spool, put that onto your reel and reverse the line. So the mono goes on first, you keep on winding. When you get to the knot between the mono and the braid, make sure that that knot goes at the bottom of the spool, and then you continue to wind the braid on. And then once you've done that, it will be absolutely perfect. You'll have a small lip on the top of the spool, it won't be overfilled, and equally it won't be underfilled. And then the next job is to get your leader on. To attach the leader, I thread the Spom braid all the way through the eyes on my spod rod. I then bring it back down to the reel. I do my knot at the reel. The knot that I use is a back-to-back grinner. With the leader material, I do 4 turns up the braid, and then with the spod material, I do 5 turns up the leader, and then butt the 2 knots up together, and that's a really easy knot to do to attach your leader to your main spodding braid. So to ensure I've got the right length of leader, I wind it on And then once it's got to the spool, I have 5 turns of leader material onto the spool, back up the rod, then down to the reel handle, and that's where I cut it off. So finally, to allow me to change quickly between a lead and a spod, I tie a double loop in the end of my leader material. So that's a 1 large figure of 8 loop, and then followed by, in the end of that figure of 8 loop, a smaller one, and that creates a tag end that allows me to pull it and easily unloop my spod, change to a lead, or vice versa, unloop my lead, change it to a spod. And that just means that when you're casting out and it's bedding down, it doesn't bed down that hard that you need a baiting needle to unpick the knot. That tag can simply be pulled and the knot comes apart. So that's how I spool up for spod and marker work. It might be a little bit more time consuming than just spooling up one spool, putting your backing on and doing the guesswork, but I find this gets a much more accurate result to it, how exactly you want that spool to be filled. And that little bit of extra time is going to save you an awful lot more time in the long run, not having to deal with crack-offs and all of the sort of dramas that are usually associated with spodding and using braid.